Battlefield reporting. Iowa political journalists covering intense campaigns with confusing claims. We're seeking their insight and perspective in a roundtable discussion on this edition of Iowa Press.
Funding for Iowa Press was provided by Friends, the Iowa Public Television Foundation.
Iowa banks know you want honest advice about how to best reach your financial goals, whether it's financing and education, buying a new home, growing a business, or funding retirement. Iowa Banks, Iowa Values. MyIowaBank.com.
The Rotary Clubs of Iowa and Rotary International.
In 1985, Rotary International committed to a goal of ending polio worldwide. Very soon now, after immunizing over 2 billion children, the goal will be achieved. Rotary, humanity in motion.
Alliant Energy, working to help Iowa small businesses become more profitable with energy-efficient heating, cooling, lighting, and more. Information is available at alliantenergy.com.
Iowa Communications Network. The ICN is committed to the enhancements of distance learning and continues to meet the demands for greater access of high-speed internet by educational users. For decades, Iowa Press has brought you politicians and newsmakers from across Iowa and beyond. Now celebrating more than 40 years of broadcast excellence on statewide Iowa Public Television. This is the Friday, October 17 edition of Iowa Press. Here is Dean Borg.
Political reporters are feeling a bit weary at this stage of the campaigns leading up to the 2014 elections. We're about 2 weeks away. Voters' decisions this November arguably have the most implications of any recent Iowa election, filling an open seat in the U.S. Senate, 2 open congressional seats, electing a governor, and determining which party controls Iowa's General Assembly, or at least the Iowa Senate. So it's high time that we seek insight from those who are covering the campaigns. Associated Press political reporter Catherine Lucy, Gazette writer James Lynch, Des Moines Register columnist Kathy Obradovich, and Radio Iowa's Kay Henderson. Kathy, I'm going to start off with you. We're in October now, late stage of October. Back in January and February, we always say, well, it's going to go this way, I think, unless there's an October surprise. Are there October surprises that occur throughout the world or in the United States that could influence the election?
Well, October's not over yet, Dean. There's still time for somebody to turn into a pumpkin before the end of the month. I have heard discussion about Ebola possibly working up into a game changer in some races around the country. Now that Ebola is in the country, there's all the finger pointing about whether the Obama administration, the CDC, did enough to stop Ebola in West Africa and keep it from coming, and also preparedness for hospitals in the United States for dealing with this virus. However, I don't really see that as being a game changer here in Iowa unless we see something come up really close to home, like a case showing up in Iowa.
Well, I wonder if the Obama leadership on this, and President Obama's trying now to show leadership in this, if there weren't that, or ISIS, for example, that might reflect poorly on a Democratic candidate, such as Bruce Braley.
Obama's job approval is already low in Iowa, below 50%. This certainly feeds into that right now, and it's part of a narrative that ISIS as well, the Obama administration's reactive and not getting out ahead of these issues. But I think there's a limited effect on candidates here. I think that people in Iowa tend to judge the candidates one by one and not necessarily make them part of a national narrative.
You buying into that, Kay?
Well, you heard Joni Ernst in the debate this past week in Sioux City say that Bruce Braley and President Obama are not proactive, they're reactive.
Yes, said it several times.
She said it several times. And so she is trying to reinforce the idea that Bruce Braley is tied with President Obama, and that's the Republican playbook. They're trying to tie Democrats to the anchor, if you will, of President Obama and try to sink them. I can't tell you what the October surprise is because I don't want to ruin the surprise, Dean. But it could be an international incident. It could be one of those things. But the other thing we have to keep in mind is that tens of thousands of Iowans have already voted. So the impact of a surprise is not going to be as great as it was in 1994, for example, because you have people who have already cast a ballot.
And certainly with Ebola, Democrat Bruce Braley is being very careful, leaving nothing to chance. He went back to D.C. yesterday in advance of the Senate debate, attended a congressional hearing, made sure people knew that he was doing his due diligence on that. So he is trying to make sure that he isn't looking like he is just being reactive in terms of President Obama.
And the other thing he did was he said what many Republicans have been saying, we might want to enact a travel ban.
Yeah, he didn't
there
rule that
aren't a
out.
lot of Democrats who have jumped on that bandwagon, if you will. But he said it may be necessary.
I'm not sure if it's the big surprise, but gas prices are down. And I mean, it's a pleasant surprise for motorists. And I don't think we saw that coming. And I don't know that either candidate or either party is going to be able to take advantage of that. But it's one of those things that really does impact Iowans because we travel a lot. I mean, we drive a lot here in Iowa. So I think it's a pleasant surprise, not necessarily one that's going to change the outcome of the election, but we'll take it.
You know, one thing, Catherine, that we're always surprised by is who's coming to Iowa next.
Yes. Yeah.
Big name personalities
Who
coming in at
isn't
the last.
coming to Iowa, I think, is the question at the moment. I mean, we have Elizabeth Warren, the Massachusetts senator, is here for Bruce Braley on Sunday. That's a big get for his campaign. I mean, she's hugely popular with the Democratic base, and I think may bring out Democrats who haven't been that engaged in that race, who are interested in her as a potential 2016 candidate. He also has First Lady Michelle Obama next week. Joni Ernst has, I believe, an event with Rand Paul, with Mike Huckabee, and you have other folks. Another thing that's interesting, I think, is that a lot of people are coming in for the Republican in the 1st Congressional District. You're seeing a lot of surrogates coming in there for Rob Blum, which to me says Democrats think perhaps they have an opportunity there. He is doing events with Paul this week. He has Rubio coming in later in the month. And so I think another way to look at these surrogates, it's who's coming in and who are they coming in
We'll
for.
be talking about that race and Republican Rod Blum just a bit later here, Catherine. Thanks for mentioning that. What do you think about the surrogates coming in, Kay? Is that going to, because independents, if they are in play, it doesn't seem to be that independents are going to turn out for these. It's the base that comes out for these people who are coming in.
And right now what you sort of smell from both campaigns is that this is a desperate attempt to get their base enthused on both sides, on the Republican side and the Democratic side. You have to remember that politics is often transactional. The other word that you sometimes use is they use one another. The 2016 candidates are coming in. The 2014 candidates are using them because it builds enthusiasm for themselves as a 2014 candidate. And the 2016 candidates are coming in because it's a way to meet people here without being an outright, getting rid of the potential and saying, I am a presidential candidate.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing that these big names do is it gets these candidates some free media coverage, right? They are all doing a lot of, there's a lot of advertising and there's a lot of negative advertising. People have maybe tuned out to those TV ads. But, a big name in Iowa tends to draw a lot of media coverage. Now, that can cut both ways. I mean, when Michelle Obama was here and got Bruce Braley's name wrong 7 times, that was not the kind of media attention that
so
they
she's
wanted.
coming back to get it right.
Yes. Yes, exactly. And
they must think she's worth it. I mean, she's coming back. She's doing another event in Iowa City, so they are not the national ridicule hasn't really stopped that.
Yeah, and she is the popular Obama.
Of course.
I don't expect to see President Obama here.
I'm not surprised by any of these people who are coming because of the 2016 implications. One thing I am surprised about is Senate Democratic chairmen and women not coming out to support Bruce Braley because really their jobs are on the line too. I mean, if Joni Ernst wins and the Senate control flips, they're not going to be chairs anymore. We saw Ag Chairwoman Debbie Stabenow from Michigan has been here a number of times for Bruce Braley, but I'm kind of wondering where these other folks are. I mean, if they want to hold on to those chairs, which are good for fundraising and future campaigns, I would think they'd be out here campaigning for Bruce Braley.
Yeah, who do some of those people fire up, though? I mean, the average voter probably can't name most of these chairs. They're not necessarily going to be a draw for campaign events or rallies. I think that what those candidates ought to be doing is funneling money into Iowa.
Catherine, the debates between Joni Ernst and Bruce Braley, I'll get the name right. Braley.
He'll appreciate it.
Are over now. We had the last one this week. As you look over the 3 debates that they had, were they effective in moving one way or the other?
You know, I think we all watch the debates. We watch all of them. We parse them. Most people aren't watching more than one of them, if that. And I don't know if they've moved a ton of voters. I think everything about this race is very closely matched, and the candidates were close in the debates. I think what was interesting is you see them trying to do different things in a lot of ways. Braley is focusing very hard on policy contrasts with Ernst. He repeatedly uses the phrase, at least in the last 2 debates, sound bites have consequences. I think we've all heard a lot. And so he's really trying to talk about things she said and where she stands on issues. She really wants to try and bring the conversation back to her personal background, her personal story, which is a compelling and interesting story about her military background and her farm background. And so they are often doing different things. And so in that way, I think they both have done a lot of what they want to do in terms of what their pitch is to the voters.
And pitching to one specific, if maybe more than one, but a single demographic group too.
Yeah. Definitely pitching to women in this campaign.
Absolutely.
And of course, Joni Ernst, I think, has been fairly subtle through most of this campaign in saying don't vote. She's not saying she's not saying vote for me because I'm a woman. She is repeatedly talking about herself as a mother.
Yes.
And that we heard it several times in this latest debate. We are hearing it a lot, and trying to draw her experience as a mother and as that relates to issues. But she's not saying, we need to have more women in Washington. And why would she do that? She has a big advantage with men right now, and that kind of argument would turn off that base of support. I think men tend to lean Republican, women tend to lean Democratic. Bruce Braley is pressing on all of those issues that he thinks is going to widen that gap with women.
If you look at where the campaign is right now, Braley is really pushing the abortion issue. He's bringing in folks from Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood is running ads on his behalf because I think that is what's going to move independent women his way. And what Ernst is doing on this issue, which you saw this past week at the Sioux City debate, was she has moderated her message beyond what it was in the primary. She's saying things like, we need to talk about this issue. We need to get something through that Republicans and Democrats can agree on. That doesn't necessarily...
She's also being very vocal about her support for access to birth control.
Right.
She's repeatedly said that that's something she does not want to get
She
rid of.
actually has said people have a right to birth control. And so she's moderated her message. Some of her most fervent supporters among the conservative ranks, aren't necessarily enthused about this moderation, but it's not as if those conservatives are going to go flip and vote for Bruce Braley.
And I lost track of how many times when she was answering that question in the Sioux City debate, she said, "I'm for life." I mean, it was just like every other sentence was, "I'm for life."
Yes.
I mean, there's no mistake about where she stands on the abortion issue. She left no doubt there.
Right. But Democrats must see this moving people in their numbers because they are only pushing harder on abortion as an issue in the last days of the race. The ads are coming from Planned Parenthood, from the Democratic Senatorial Committee, and Braley is talking about it at every opportunity. He's doing an event today on that.
The last Des Moines Register Iowa poll looked at where the candidates were on issues and where general election likely voters were. And Bruce Braley wins on Social Security, on abortion, climate change. A majority of voters lean toward his position on those issues. Joni Ernst, taxes, gun rights. So the abortion issue, I think, is not only just an appeal to women, but general election voters in general tend to lean that way on abortion.
And Jim, this past week, the Quinnipiac poll that came out indicated that independents, as compared to their past poll, had moved precipitously to Bruce Braley. What has Braley been doing to attract independents, or could it be the emphasis on women's issues?
It could be that emphasis on women's issues. It could be that the message is finally getting through, that the independents are tuning in. I have to point out, though, that the NBC Marist poll had just basically the opposite results, showing that Joni Ernst had a bigger spread among independents than Braley. So I'm not sure we know where independents are going, if they're even going to the polls.
We're dealing with really close,
are they going to vote?
Close races, which means that we're talking about small margins of difference, and so so we are going to see variability.
You mentioned, Kathy, and I want to come back to it, the effect of early voting. You think that is a significant factor in this election?
So Republicans are putting more emphasis on early voting than they have in the past, and they're having more success with early voting than they did even in 2012. However, it's a question of whether the strategy is different. If Republicans are just getting more of their base to vote early instead of waiting until Election Day, that could help them deal with any October surprise, as you mentioned. But Democrats seem to be trying to get people who are marginal voters, and they're trying to get people to vote early who might not normally vote in a midterm election. And to the extent that they are successful with that and can grow their base, that will be a significant factor.
The key is the independent voters that you're seeing vote early. There's a good share of them. We don't know if they're Democrat-leading independents or Republican-leading independents. We won't know until the votes are counted.
I think Democrats are making the argument, though, that more of them, I think they've delivered more of the absentee ballots to those independent voters than Republicans delivered to independent voters. So they're feeling some optimism there.
Catherine,
but also in terms of who are the Republicans getting out versus the Democrats have been doing this a lot longer and say that they're getting less likely voters. But Republicans are saying that they too are seeing success in getting people out who would not necessarily vote. So they say they are also targeting sort of so-called marginal voters.
Staying with you, Catherine, let's turn to the governor's race, Jack Hatch and Terry Branstad. Terry Branstad seems to have a double-digit lead.
He has a huge lead.
Huge lead, but also huge campaign purse.
Absolutely.
And has that made the difference?
He's a long-standing governor. He's popular. Iowa is doing well on lots of metrics, and he has tons of money. So
and it didn't help
great.
that Jack Hatch is suspended for a time television advertising.
He is not on television at the moment, as far as I know. And so, Hatch has struggled with fundraising. He did not have statewide name recognition, and not being able to be on TV has as much as Branstad is, really creates a huge problem for him.
So the question to all of you then, with that huge lead, is it so impressive that it could provide coattails for other Republican candidates even above the Ernst campaign?
Right. Dean, I went back and looked at the 1990 race. Terry Branstad won that race by 22 points over Don Avenson that year. Tom Harkin was reelected that year by 9 points. So there were no coattails there. In talking with some political scientists, including Drake professor Arthur Sanders, who was on the program last week, he said that coattails have changed. There used to not be as many coattails, but because there's been such a partisan shift where you have these two camps that are just so entrenched, there are coattails, and this might be a factor in the Braley-Ernst race, because if it's really, really narrow and Terry Branstad brings along a few voters, that could prove the difference. If you look at 2010, there was a Republican candidate who won surprisingly. It was Matt Schultz, the Republican running for Secretary of State. And that race was right underneath the governor's race on the ballot. There are a lot of Republicans who think that Terry Branstad's coattails carried Matt Schultz to victory in 2010.
And looking at up the ticket, Terry Branstad, for example, appearing with Rod Blum and bringing in Chris Christie to appear with Rod Blum. I mean, those kinds of things, he can turn his attention now to other races and not worry so much about his own race. He was buying ads in Quincy, Illinois, just so he can have a good shot at winning Lee County. It's sort of a matter of personal pride. He'd never won Lee County before. And so by not keeping Branstad busy enough, he absolutely has an opportunity, maybe not just by coattails, but by his campaign activity drawing attention to these other races.
But I wonder if, because his race isn't competitive, does it create a vacuum? And the coattail effect goes to Bruce Braley or Joni Ernst or someone else, where people are not really paying attention to the governor's race. And it's not creating the excitement that people are going to go out and vote for Terry Branstad, where they're going to pay more attention to the Senate race. And if there are coattails, it's going to be Bruce Braley's or Joni Ernst.
Well, one thing Branstad has done that we can't really tell how well it worked until after the fact, which isn't, I guess, coattails, but is the advance team, is his efforts to get new leadership installed at the state party, get a more professional operation over there, and the sort of the so-called victory operation that they're running statewide. I mean, he has been a huge part of trying to get a more robust, statewide GOP, and that really could help a lot of races up and down the ticket, I think.
One thing that has surprised me is that Branstad hasn't been as involved this time around as he was last time around with messaging for legislative candidates. I mean, he appeared with the Speaker of the House, Republican Craig Paulson from Hiawatha, and talked about an agenda that if you elect Republicans to run the House and the Senate, these are the things we're going to do. That hasn't happened this year, which has really been a surprise to me.
But his agenda is so short. and it's the same agenda from the past session. I mean, Connect Every Acre, the broadband initiative, and trying to get his bullying initiative passed. So, I mean, I'm not sure there's any agenda to promote there.
Well, and I'm not going to suggest this goes into the governor's thinking at all, but the fact is that having a split legislature benefits the governor. His popularity, I think, has benefited from having a foil, somebody to point to when something doesn't go right in the state legislature.
Let's talk about the lieutenant governor candidates for just a second. I've seen more of Jack Hatch's lieutenant governor candidate than I have of Kim Reynolds.
Yeah, well, Jack Hatch needs Monica Vernon. He needs her her name ID and popularity in eastern Iowa. Yeah. She is a city council member. She ran for Congress in that district. She has a lot of friends, and she also brings something to the ticket that Jack Hatch can't, as far as talking about outside of Des Moines. So I think that she is an integral part of that campaign. Whereas Kim Reynolds, she is a part of the governor's team. Absolutely, they are they are shoulder to shoulder all the time. But he does
even not when he's not campaigning.
Yes, but he doesn't necessarily need to showcase her in the same way that Hatch needs to showcase Monica Vernon.
The other point is that Monica Vernon is likely to run for governor herself in 4 years, and so this is a great way to make friends and influence people for your own campaign going forward.
Let's go to the congressional races. Thanks, Kate. Congressional races, Catherine, 3rd District.
Yes, the 3rd District, I mean, is very competitive, probably one of the most competitive congressional races in the nation, which is interesting just because there aren't that many competitive congressional races because most states don't draw districts the way Iowa does, which is very clean. And right now you have Democrat Stacey Apple, Republican David Young, and I haven't seen a ton of polling because they're so small, but it's viewed as very, very close, I think.
And the fascinating thing about this race, it is close, but there's not a lot of outside money coming in to try to influence the outcome. It's as if both parties at the national level have given up on, the Democrats have sort of given up on winning the House. And so this is really not a race that's on anybody's radar.
I think the Senate race and the governor's race really could influence, in terms of it's really the turnout and the ground game and who is really winning the ground game could play a big difference in this, because this is, I think, going to be a very tight race.
Jim, Bruce Braley's seat is going to be open in the 1st District, and Rod Blum and Pat Murphy are running for that. How's that going?
Well, I think Democrats are concerned about hanging on to that seat. Bruce Braley has represented...
Translate concerned, worried?
Worried, yes. Worried about hanging on to that seat, which is a surprise because they have a huge voter registration advantage there. Bruce Braley has represented parts of that district for the past 8 years, and yet it appears to be close. There's a lot of enthusiasm that I haven't seen. Like 2 years ago, I didn't see the same level of enthusiasm for Rod Blum. He's a better candidate. He's I guess what you would call sort of a businessman Republican. Pat Murphy is this very passionate liberal or progressive Democrat.
Unapologetic.
Unapologetic, yes. Blum is bringing in Marco Rubio. He had Rick Santorum in, and I guess Rand Paul. Pat Murphy's bringing in Illinois Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky, who is a household name, I guess. And the Democratic campaign or congressional committee is pumping a lot of money into that race.
Quickly then drop into southeast Iowa and that 3rd matchup there. The
3rd matchup, I don't see anything different this time than 2 years ago. Incumbent Dave Loebsack and his challenger Marionette Miller Meeks. I don't know that either one of them has caught fire.
So that's just a race that nobody's paying a whole lot of attention to.
Doesn't appear to be.
Yeah. Let's go over then to the 2nd, not that we just did the 2nd district, 4th District. And Kathy?
So again, a race that not a lot of people are paying attention to. Steve King is the incumbent. This is the most Republican district in Iowa. Jim Maurer, political newcomer, Democrat, young man, a National Guard veteran, and has an interesting resume. But I think that a question is whether he is able to catch fire. Steve King has been kind of playing keep away. He just went up on TV, and there's been a question about whether, how many debates they will have. We are expecting the two candidates to debate on October 23rd here at on Iowa Public Television.
Yes, and Steve King, usual campaign, a little cat and mouse with his opponent.
Yes, he does like to play about whether he's going to debate or not, and he's been complaining about one of Jim Maurer's ads.
Well, as you look down, Kay, do you see anything that is likely to change? We asked the October surprise, but do you think that we're heading now into voters pretty much having made up their minds?
Well, the October surprise might wind up being some incredible upset that we don't see because the polling data, you mentioned, Jim, the NBC Marist poll, shows that there's kind of a pox on both houses. Even Republicans are sort of unhappy with their party and Democrats are unhappy with their party. And so we may see some oddball result in a race here that no one saw coming. I think that's the thing to keep an eye on is if this electorate gets down to the wire and says, I can't stand either party, that could be the October surprise.
We have about 30 seconds, Kathy.
Yeah, well, I mean, so this is why I think that both parties made mistakes by not maybe having stronger primaries, especially the Democrats in the first district. Well, a big primary field, but I think that Democrats, Bruce Braley and also Stacey Apple could have been benefited by having primary candidates.
I also want to note that Libertarian U.S. Senate candidate Doug Boutsier was killed in a plane crash within the past week, and we extend our condolences and sympathy, deep sympathy, to his family there in Dubuque. Well, thank you for your insights, and we'll have you back after the election to apologize. Next week on Iowa Press, we're concluding our statewide debate series where we've taken you along with us on the road to meet the candidates. So we'll be in Storm Lake Thursday, October 23rd with incumbent 4th District Congressman Steve King and Democratic challenger Jim Maurer. Now you can watch the Iowa Press debate in person on the campus of Buena Vista University, or you can join us live on Iowa Public Television beginning at 7. That's Thursday night. And that program will be recorded, so you have a second chance to see it. That's the King-Maurer debate, and you can see it then recorded playback at our regular Iowa Press time, 7:30 Friday night and noon on Sunday. I'm Dean Borg. Thanks to our panel, and thank you for joining us today.
Funding for Iowa Press was provided by Friends, the Iowa Public Television Foundation.
Iowa banks know you want honest advice about how to best reach your financial goals, whether it's financing and education, buying a new home, growing a business, or funding retirement. Iowa Banks, Iowa Values. MyIowaBank.com.
The Rotary Clubs of Iowa and Rotary International.
In 1985, Rotary International committed to a goal of ending polio worldwide. Very soon now, after immunizing over 2 billion children, the goal will be achieved. Rotary, humanity in motion.
Alliant Energy, working to help Iowa small businesses become more profitable with energy-efficient heating, cooling, lighting, and more. Information is available at alliantenergy.com.
Iowa Communications Network. The ICN is committed to the enhancements of distance learning and continues to meet the demands for greater access of high-speed internet by educational users.